Hello and welcome to UpperPen. My name is Dakota, and today I am speaking with John Joseph Adams, editor of the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy series. Thank you so much for being here, John.
And thanks for having me.
So, for folks who might live under a rock and don't exactly know what this is, can you tell them a little bit about the series?
Sure. So Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy is part of the long-running Best American series, which started with Best American Short Stories like more than 100 years ago. And there's a bunch of other volumes like Best American Food Writing and Best American Mystery and Suspense and all manner of things. And Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy started 11 years ago. This is volume 11. Um, I founded the series. They never had one before, and I started pitching it a while before, like it was a couple years before they actually said yes. And I had an agent who like retired and became a book editor, and then I got a new agent, and then the first thing my new agent did for me was finally sell the publisher on doing Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. So it was off to a good start. Um, and yeah, I mean, like the name suggests, it's a anthology that reprints the best stories that were published in any given year. When it first launched, the sort of best American, or not sorry, best American, the best of market was kind of more clogged than it is now. Gardner Dozois still had his best, and he sadly passed. And they let it die with him, unfortunately, which still boggles my mind. Jonathan Strahan had one. A bunch of different editors had them, and then like these days, like Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy is one of the only ones left. Ellen Datlow has her best horror book, and I think Neil Clark's best science fiction is still going on, but it's had some difficulties. Like it was released late one year or something like that. Um, anyway, yeah, I try to read. I'm the series editor, so I work on this. I work on the book every year, and then each year we pair with a best-selling author, famous author. This year's guest editor is Nnedi Okorafor. And so as series editor, I try to read everything that's published in the given year that's vaguely science fiction or fantasy. And anybody who reads the series, you can know it's like sometimes it's very slightly science fiction or fantasy, and horror gets thrown in there too, as long as it has science fiction or fantasy elements. Actually, a weird amount of horror tends to end up in these books, given that it's like that's not really the focus. Um, but I try to read everything, and then I come up with a list of like what I consider the best 80 stories. And I do it equally 40 science fiction, 40 fantasy. And then the guest editor reads those. They read them without any identifying information on them, so they don't know who the authors were. They don't know where it was published. They do know if I labeled it science fiction or fantasy, but that's it. And then so they read them all, and then they make their selections, and they're supposed to pick 10 science fiction and 10 fantasy also, so that the book, which contains 20 stories, is equally representative of both. Um, and I sort of instituted that when I first started because, my first job in the field was working at the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, which also has both genres in the title. And so people would expect it to be equally both. And they were often annoyed because it was like, oh, it's like there's no science fiction in here. It's all fantasy and stuff like that. And so that had always stuck in my mind once I started editing, sitting in the big chair, because I was an assistant when I started there. And so I started doing that. Like I started doing it with Lightspeed, and then started doing it with Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy when we launched that. And the funny thing is that by doing that, I am forcing myself to label something science fiction or fantasy, right? And I don't actually care. Like I love science fiction, I love fantasy. You know, I don't care where the line is, but I force myself in basically all of my editorial roles to decide if something is science fiction or fantasy. And sometimes it's kind of hard to decide like which side of the line does it fall on. Um, but but yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I started doing this 11 years ago, and you know, uh, they keep wanting to do more, so that's been great.
I can't even imagine trying to keep up with the number of stories that are written every year. Like that in and of itself must be like a task.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, keeping track of what they are is
Yeah.
also a task, even without reading them, because a lot of anthologies come out, like smaller anthologies. A lot of them come out, and it's like the people who publish them think like, oh, okay, well, we did all this work to put this thing together. Okay, now we're done. And it's like it's almost like sometimes a publisher wants to keep it secret. It's like because it's like I'm actively trying to find out about all these things, and somehow they still escape my notice. And you know, I find out a lot of, I found out about a lot of projects just because like an author I've published is in there and I see them mention it. And so I always really suggest to authors to mention a book as much as possible, like when it first comes out or something, like on social media and stuff like that, so that at least like people can find out about that book, even if the publisher doesn't do much publicity for it. And I mean, when you have a small press, a lot of anthologies come out from small presses, and there's limited resources, and one person is often doing like five different jobs, so publicity tends to not be the forefront of their efforts. And with social media the way it is these days, it's like it's so fragmented, and Twitter's just a cesspool. It's like it's and that's but that's still where most people are. And
Yeah.
like so there's like Blue Sky now, which is becoming more of a community, and it's pretty good for science fiction and fantasy, but it's still so much smaller. That and then not everybody's there, so it's just a lot harder to get the word out about a book. So I do have an assistant that works with me on Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. So Christopher Savasco, he edited a magazine called Paradox back in the day. It was, I don't know, like early to like mid 2000s. It was a historical fiction slash historical fantasy magazine. um and so he was editing that, and like I got to know him in New York when I used to live in that area. And So yeah, when it came time to when I was like basically so we started Best American Science Fiction Fantasy in 2014, and then in like 2015 I started editing my novel imprint, John Joseph Adams Books, which was also published by the same publisher as Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. At the time, it was Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. That they then got sold to HarperCollins, and Mariner Books was one of their imprints, and so like now basically everything is under Mariner Books. That was HMH. So like Best American is like published by Mariner Books technically on the spine, but it's HarperCollins. Anyway, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt was publishing in my imprint, and as I started doing that, I just started getting busier and busier. I still edit it. I still edit Lightspeed. I still publish it. I edit anthologies other than Best American, and so I decided at some point to hire on an assistant so I could more easily keep track of everything, and then he just kind of does like slush reading for me. Do you know slush? You know
Yeah.
the term, yeah. So and so it's like funny to have like slush reading of published stuff, but it's like when you're reading for something that is like supposed to be the best of the year, you get into that same mindset of you do like when you're reading through a slush pile, because you have to make these like really like quick and hard decisions, and it's like it might like if I was reading it just for the eye towards publication, maybe a lot of these stories I would like read all the way to the end, and maybe I would publish them. But when I'm reading for Best American, it's like, I mean, it's got to be really great immediately,
Yeah.
and it's like it's got to have that like je ne sais quoi sort of thing that it's like you just know it when you see it. And so it really can go, you know it can be very much like slush, and it can be very brutal, for the stories, not for me, just um but um but yeah, so because of that, having my assistant go through things that are like, I don't want to. There's certain magazines that I've read a bunch, and I just don't vibe with them that much. It's just whatever the editor's general taste is. It doesn't vibe with mine very much, right? But I
Yeah.
don't want to not consider them, so I have him look through them first, and then he can point out anything to me that he thinks is worthy of me taking a look, and then so that way I can still consider them without having to um to do it myself when knowing in my mind it's very unlikely I'm going to find anything in those magazines. And I hate to, I hate to say that about a magazine. I'm not going to name who they are, obviously, but it's just that's how it is. Like sometimes an editor's taste isn't to your taste. That's the same reason why not everybody like loves the John Joseph Adams anthology. So so yeah, I mean that's how we manage it is I have my assistant and then we both work at it and have lots of spreadsheets to keep track of everything. We have to keep track of all the different new magazines that come along. We have to keep track of the ones that died. Um, and David Steffen at the Submissions Grinder has helped me a lot with that over the years, and I thank him in the forward every year because every year when I'm doing like the in my forward, I basically do like an overview of the field. It's like I do a lot of statistics and stuff, and so it's like I I give a lot of data about all the stuff that's in the book, but then also the stuff that has been published during the year. And then so at a certain point, I mention, what magazines are new, and then which magazines have ceased publication, and because the submissions grinder is like a database for writers to find places to send their stories. Obviously he keeps track of when something closes, and so I turn to him every year to say like, hey, can you help me figure out what things closed this year? I mean, I have some sense of it, but then there's always things that I missed or I didn't realize that the thing had closed, or sometimes there's a thing I didn't even know existed. I usually don't mention those because it's like if I didn't know it existed before, it's probably not worth mentioning like now. But yeah, so yeah, it is a hard job to keep track of it all. And yeah, even more so to read it all because it takes a lot of time.
Are there any very specific pet peeves that you have that will make a story just,
Mhm.
yeah,
Not really. And if I did have any, I just wouldn't say what they are.
yeah,
Because I so I have a thing where like I don't ever want to say that oh I hate X, Y, or Z because even if I generally don't like X, Y, or Z, if you write the best X, Y, or Z story, maybe I'll like it. And there's a very good chance I'll like it. Um, and so I don't want people who heard me talk about in an interview that I don't like X, Y, or Z not and have them not send me that story because of that. And so I'm always like a little baffled that like certain magazines they have like a long list of things that they just put in their guidelines and they're just like, no, don't send
yeah,
this. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I just don't get it, because it's like, yeah, I get a lot of people like are sick of zombies or whatever, but I mean, it's like, really, you wouldn't want to see the best zombie story ever. So I don't want to dissuade anybody from sending me anything like that. And so yeah, I don't have any pet peeves like that that I would name certainly, and I don't really think I have any hard and fast things in general anyway, because like I said, I'm just trying to be open to whatever, and I will say that this isn't a pet peeve, but it because so anybody who's read the series, who's read Lightspeed, has probably noticed that I tend to gravitate towards these like weird format stories. Stories that just like take some sort of unusual format and use that as a way to tell a story. And like I'm kind of a sucker for them, and so it's like writers have definitely caught on because they keep sending, it's like they keep sending them to me, and it's great. I mean, I do honestly love these kind of weird format stories. And it's just that they're real pain in the ass sometimes, So one of my favorite stories I've ever published, ever read, was in this volume. I published it in Lightspeed last year. We Will Teach You How to Read. We Will Teach You How to Read by Carolyn Yoakum.
yeah,
Yeah, and so that is a very weird format story. One of the hardest things I've ever had to try to figure out how to publish because it's got like some two column text and like it's important that the text in column A lines up with the text in column B, and in a print book that's fine. You can set that text. That's fine. In an ebook, the text is reflowable, and how much text fits on the screen depends on what your user settings is. So you can't really just use standard formatting in an ebook for that. And so when I published it in Lightspeed, we ended up using images. Like we had to take images of the text, and then of course we had to make sure to do extensive alt text for people who they would need like a screen reader or whatever. Like, we did also have an audio version, so at least there was that. It's like, if you're a person who is going to need a screen reader, you probably prefer to listen to the audio version. But I mean, we wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to experience it whatever way they could. But it was just a real challenge. I was like so super excited about that story when I first read it. I like bought it immediately. I'm glad I like read it as soon as she submitted it because like I bought it within like an hour or something, and I was like so effusive in my acceptance letter, which I don't usually say anything in particular in acceptance letter. I just say like, hey, this was great. I'd love to buy it. Here you go. But then this one, I was just like so blown away by it that I just like went over the top. And so Carolyn said she like printed out the acceptance letter and she has like above her desk. Um, and and so I was so excited about it. Like I would have published it probably right away, but I just couldn't figure out how to do it, because it's like, we had to figure out how to do it on the website, which was less of a challenge. But then we also had to figure out how to make it work in the ebook. And then at the time we were still in Kindle periodicals, which made us format stuff in a third format. So you'd think they would have just taken the ebook version and published that, but they wouldn't do that. We had to do this whole separate version, and it was just a huge pain. And we're out of Kindle periodicals now, but at the time when this came out, we were still in it. So I did have to still figure out how to make it work on that. But once I came around to the idea of having to use images, it was fine. Um, but yeah, so as much as I love these format stories, though, they can be a real pain in the butt sometimes. And I'll be really glad to not have to format this particular story anymore, because I had to figure it all out for Lightspeed, and then once we reprinted it in Best American, it was like I had to babysit that thing all the way through production too. And it was actually like the day before it came out, I realized like, oh shoot, they never sent me the ebook version. Like I had seen the print version, and we saw that the print version was okay, but they never sent me the ebook. And so I was like, oh, we got to look at that, because what if they didn't listen to me? Because I know I gave them instructions like you got to use images, man, because it's like it's not going to work otherwise. But they were like, oh no, no, we know how to format an ebook, and so they tried to do it with the hubris involved with deciding that they could just do it with tables. Like, no, it doesn't work. It's like I broke it in 2 seconds, like like just playing with the settings. It's like, okay, no, like it obviously doesn't work. I hope they fixed it. 'Cause like I emailed them, and I hadn't heard back. I assume somebody fixed it, but um anyway, I'll be very glad to not have to babysit the formatting of this story again. And I told Carolyn, it's like, good luck to your future collection publisher when they have to do it. I'm not going to deal with it that time.
They just come to you at that point and they're like,
No,
please
no,
send me
no,
what you
no,
have.
no. I give up. I mean, honestly, like I have the ebook of Lightspeed. I send it to Mariner to the production department. I sent it to them. They could have seen exactly how I did it. I'm happy to send it to anybody, but I don't want to have to babysit it anymore.
Oh my gosh. Um, so you've been doing this for quite a while, but how did you get into editing
Oh,
these anthologies?
yeah. When I was around 18 or so, like I got this urge to start writing. I played Dungeons and Dragons, like, my whole life basically. And, particularly from age like sort of 14 to 18, like was my prime, like blossoming of D&D. D&D is a very like creative experience, and at some point I was like I got this desire to like create something, and so at first I decided to try like running a game, and I didn't really like the interactive elements of it. Was too challenging for me to have the interactive part as the the game master. Playing was great, but I couldn't keep all the balls juggling. And so my normal GM was just like, oh, well, why don't you try writing a story? And so I was like, all right, well, I wasn't even really sure. I didn't even know short stories were a thing at the time, which is sadly a lot of people don't know what short stories are. But and I didn't actually write a short story first. The first thing I wrote was a novel. And it was funny how disciplined you can be, like when you don't know what you're doing. Like I would come home from work and I would just like work on it so diligently. And I did finish it. It was terrible, but I mean I did finish it, and so that's something. But From there, like I dropped out of high school when I was 16 and I got my GED. And I didn't really think I was ever going to go to college. But so I started writing when I was like 18 and I was working in retail. I was working at a bookstore, so that was cool, but retail will suck the soul out of you regardless of how cool the retail job is.
Yeah.
And after a while, I was like, well, I don't want to do this forever. And so, I went back to or I went to college. I started a community college and I was studying some creative writing stuff. Initially, actually, I was going to get like a little bit like a business associate's degree, so that me and my brother-in-law could open up a game store, like a tabletop role-playing game store. And so we both went to college to study that, and then at some point it just seemed like it wasn't going to work out, and so I kept going, like we both kept going in college. It's just that he ended up going with something else, and then I veered towards writing. So I eventually went to University of Central Florida, and it was really there that like the first thing you sort of learn when you really start studying writing is that you're going to have some kind of day job or something as you
Yeah.
pursue this, because you're not going to just get to be a writer. And so I was taking these workshop classes, um the professors had noted that like I was good at giving feedback and stuff, and it kind of got me started thinking about like editing and like how being an editor would be a pretty cool job to have on the side while you're trying to pursue writing, because it's very close to writing. And I figured, and I was correct that, being an editor is like it's like a cheat code for becoming a writer, because it's like, just working as an editor, like you can't help but like just learn all these lessons like by osmosis. Like you're not even gonna be conscious of the lessons, but like, well, I mean, I usually say like reading slush does that really. Like if you're in a position where you have to like get through a slush pile, like have forcing yourself to like read like an editor, and like to know that you have X amount of time during a day and you got to get through all these manuscripts, and it's like, okay, that really forces you to read like an editor and to make like really quick and hard decisions. And just doing that like just makes you, it just like shapes your brain, like not like I said, not in a conscious way, but it just like really shapes your brain. Unfortunately, being an editor can also paralyze you as a writer, because if you can't turn off your editor as soon as you write anything, it's like, oh, I'm writing terrible slush. And so that happened to me early on, and then eventually I sort of was like, you know what? Editing has fulfilled that creative desire that I had, and I've got this opportunity, so I'm just going to launch myself into that. And so I basically stopped trying to write, and I just devoted myself fully to editing. Um, but I should say, so that was my idea, right, to get a job in editing. So after college, I moved back to New Jersey, which is where I was from, and I started just like sending out some resumes to science fiction and fantasy places. And I was thinking, like getting a job at a book publisher probably would be harder than getting a job at a magazine publisher. So I initially had targeted the science fiction magazines. And so Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction happened to be in New Jersey also. They were in Hoboken. And so it's like just the thought of like having to commute to work and like have to not go into New York, that would be much more convenient. Although I would have gladly taken any magazine job if anyone had offered me. But I sent out my resume to like FNSF, to Asimov's and Analog, to Realms of Fantasy. Realms of Fantasy was actually also in New Jersey, but FNSF was the only place that actually got back to me. And like, so this was in like early 2001. And so like Gordon Van Gelder, who was the publisher, well, he was the publisher at the time, and they recently sold the magazine to this company, Must Read Books. So he's still kind of involved, but anyway, he was the editor and publisher at the time, and so he responded. He said that he didn't have any openings, but I should check back later in the year. And so a couple months later, it was like May. And I didn't find anything else. And I had like set aside, I had given myself like 6 months after I moved, after college, to try to get something that I actually wanted before I, took something that I had to take, and so in May, I tried again. And as it happened, his assistant had just quit. So he called me up to come in for an interview, or he had me come in for an interview. And and what I think got me the job was so there was two things. So one, I said my favorite book was The Stars My Destination by Alfred Bester, which unbeknownst to me is heralded science fiction classic that most people don't know. It's like hardcore science fiction nerd people know Alfred Bester, know The Stars My Destination, but it's not like you say, if you say like, oh, my favorite book is Foundation by Asimov. Like everybody who's like knows anything about science fiction knows that, or Dune. But Stars My Destination, that's a deep cut, and I didn't even really know that it was so heralded. I just, I honestly, that was my favorite book, and it's like it's kind of what made me become an editor, because it's like the experience of reading that book and having it like sort of blow my mind the way it did. It changed the way I read. It's like I kept chasing after that high of what it was like reading that book. And so I said that, and so I mean that was a good point in my favor. And also there was a very unpopular point at the time, but I said I hated The Matrix, and everybody loved The Matrix, right?
Yeah.
And so Gordon is the kind of person who, well, he probably didn't like The Matrix if he had even seen it. Like, he's the kind of person who may not have even seen it. But he appreciated that I was willing to go all in on this probably unpopular opinion. Because it's like I didn't hedge anything. I was like, I hate The Matrix. I wasn't like I didn't think it was that great. I was like, I hate it. And like I explained why and stuff, and like what I didn't like about it and all that. And so yeah, like after the fact, when we had talked, I was like, well, what made you decide to, give me the job? And he said it was basically those two things. So, um, and yeah, like I didn't know anybody in the field. Like, you know, if you've been around the science fiction fantasy field a while, like you come to learn like there's all these conventions that you could go to where you could network with people, you could meet people. Like, so, I mean, the fact that I got the job at FNSF and I didn't know anybody, when there's all these people who have been going to conventions and could have met Gordon and like, like impressed him by like talking to him at a convention after a panel or something. And it's like, it was just like such dumb luck that I happened to, you know, apply at the time that I did and follow up on the time that I did, and just happened to nail an interview. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was just, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird thinking back on it still that I managed to do this, but um, so I worked there for like almost 9 years, and my main job was reading Slush. And I started off as an editorial assistant. Eventually, my job title changed to assistant editor. I was still mostly reading Slush, but as I was there longer, I got more responsibilities. But at a certain point, it's like I really wanted to be in the big chair, and it just really didn't. And Gordon was the editor and publisher. I figured he wasn't going to fire himself, right? So I was like, well, I'm going to probably have to figure out another way to get into the big chair. So after a couple of years there, I started like doing some freelancing and stuff. So the first thing I did was like I did some audiobook reviews for Locus, and then I started doing other kinds of things. I did a bunch of interviews for the Sci-Fi Channel's website, um, and that actually made me like a lot of contacts, because like it was for a part of it called Sci-Fi Wire, and it was kind of like the
Yeah.
news arm of the Sci-Fi Channel's website. And so all of the interviews were like they were these like short, like 300 word sort of articles that were just based on like a short interview. So it would always start with like author name told Sci-Fi Wire that, and then you would just turn like your little interview that you did into a little article. And so I would do one of those like every day. And so, that's a lot of people to talk to over the course of a year. And I did that for several years. So I just got to know a ton of people, and a ton of people would remember me when I would reach out to them later. So once I got around to start trying to do an anthology, I already knew a bunch of people because they remembered me for giving them good publicity on the Sci-Fi Channel's website. And so I started doing stuff like that, and I think it was like as early as 2005, I was trying to put together an anthology proposal. I wanted to do a post-apocalyptic anthology, and so post-apocalyptic fiction had kind of been on the outs for a long time. Like publishing had been like, okay, that's a dead genre, and it was, I think, largely from like the end of the Cold War to 2001. And I think after 9/11, like writers immediately went right there. And
Mhm.
you could see it in the slush pile immediately. And like I detected it very early on. And publishing took so long to catch up to this and to understand that this is a thing that's happening. Um, that so when I initially tried to put together my anthology pitch in 2005, it's like nobody was having it, and then so but I still kept the idea in my head because post-apocalyptic fiction was always one of my favorite genres. And one of the first articles I sold was actually like an article about post-apocalyptic fiction. So I'd already done all this research into like all the novels and everything. And I when I'd done that, I had noticed that there was hardly any anthologies. Like even from back in the day, it's like there was one anthology that was like, here's the best post-apocalyptic fiction ever book. It was called Beyond Armageddon. It was edited by Martin H. Greenberg, who edited tons of anthologies, and Walter Miller Jr., who wrote Canticle for Leibowitz, which is one of the best post-apocalyptic fiction novels ever. Um, and so there was just that one book, and there was like a handful of like other anthologies, but like nothing, like not a ton, and nothing that was like a really important book, except maybe for this one. And so a couple of years later, I saw someone had re-released that book because somebody somewhere, like it was actually Bison Books, which is like a small press. They had noticed this like trend of post-apocalyptic stuff happening, and so they re-released Beyond Armageddon. And so I saw that and I was like, hey, maybe, well, what if I did a reprint anthology of post-apocalyptic fiction, but I positioned it as a basically kind of spiritual sequel to that, you know? And so I put together a pitch, and I figured, okay, I'll send it to Bison Books and that's it. If they don't want it, probably nobody else is going to want it. And I was sort of talking about it. This was when I was living in New York, and I used to go to all these like different readings and book events in New York. So it was like, you could kind of network with people and stuff because you go to an event and a bunch of other publishing people will be at the event. So I was at this one, and there was this sort of newbie agent who had been going to that Jenny Rappaport, and so she became my first agent because I was talking about it at a dinner afterward, and I was like, hey, so I got this, I'm doing this thing, and she was like, oh, I would rep that. I bet I could sell that. I was like, really? Because I was like, I didn't think anybody's going to want to represent an anthologist. I mean, it's like, it's not like, I mean, one of the things in publishing, besides the idea that nobody wants post-apocalyptic fiction, the other thing publishing was sure of is that nobody wants anthologies. Nobody will buy an anthology. Those don't sell. Um, and that's still kind of pervasive. So it's still hard to sell anthologies sometimes. Um, but so, Jenny took me on. She sent it to Bison Books. They didn't want it because, they weren't ready to buy like a new book. Because they had just licensed the book that already existed. But so she was like, I think we could still sell it though. And so she sent it to Nightshade Books, which at the time was like kind of a scrappy independent publisher who was like publishing a lot of great books, and they were at the time they were really on the rise. And so they they were into it. They offered an insultingly small advance. It was actually kind of hilarious in retrospect, which we all laughed about, including, and they were kind of like, I can't even believe you took it for that low an amount. But it was like for a reprint anthology, you could get the rights to a story for like 1 cent a word. So it's like the advance didn't have to be huge, because it's like I could get a whole book's worth of content for not that much money. And I put together a really awesome table of contents. This was Wastelands, my first anthology. And I got Stephen King, I got George R. R. Martin, I got all these like great authors in there. And so they bought it, and then when it came out, to everyone's surprise, it sold really, really well. It earned out its in advance in like a week, because like, I mean, the advance was so small, it wasn't hard, but it just, I mean, it really sold. And like, they knew how to take a thing and like write it, like instead of just like, a lot of publishers like take a book and they release it and then it's like, okay, it's like the baby turtle where it's like, good luck surviving on your own. But they just really supported it, and like, we're happy to capitalize on it when it was a success. And so, that sold really well, and it was really surprised everyone. And I mean, it made my whole career possible basically because, if I'd done my first anthology and it just sunk without a stone, I mean, it would have been a lot harder to sell the next one. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that's what opened up all the doors. And then because that was so successful, they asked me if I wanted to do another one. And they said, well, how about zombies? And so that became The Living Dead, which came out actually the same year as Wastelands, weirdly enough. And I didn't even like know a ton about zombies at the time. I mean, it's kind of like a apocalypse adjacent. I mean, most zombie stories are apocalypse stories. Um, but I sort of just had to do like a crash course on zombies because I mean, I was not an expert on that. I was an expert on post-apocalyptic fiction. So, but still, it worked out okay. The Living Dead actually sold even better than Wastelands, and so it was like the combination of those two things really is what made my entire career possible. Um, so yeah, that was a really long answer to your simple question, but here we are.
Well, so mentioning that people didn't want post-apocalyptic or they didn't think it would sell is really
Yeah.
strange to me. I had a an author on last or 2 weeks ago who just wrote a dystopian
Hmm.
book,
Yeah.
and she grew up with like Divergent, and
Oh
she
yeah.
called 2010s the golden era of dystopian or
Uh-huh.
post-apocalyptic. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's so funny because like
Yeah.
that was so pervasive then.
Right. Yeah, it's just that publishing was so slow to get that it was in the air. And then finally, yeah, around then, like 2010 and
Yeah.
onward, like that's when it was really booming. I mean, and like The Road came out somewhere in that vicinity. I think it was maybe it was in 2008 or 2007, but it was like Wastelands definitely got to ride some of the interest that was driven by The Road. Which, by the way, I don't know if you know this, that was actually a trunked novel of Cormac McCarthy's. Like he had written it and sold, and he had written it years before it was published, and his publisher didn't want it, because, I mean, because he was like a literary writer or whatever. He
Yeah.
was, they didn't want to publish this post-apocalyptic novel. And it was only after, I guess, somebody finally, got this sense that apocalyptic stuff might sell. And then his editor was probably like, "Oh, hey, yeah, Cormac had that one book. Maybe we should revisit that." And so, yeah, it all kind of came around at the right time, I guess, and all fed off of each other. Um, but yeah, it's kind of funny to think that Divergent was uh, hitting right then. Um, but yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That makes sense why it was so huge when it came out.
Yeah.
And I see you have Veronica Roth's Poster Girl back there, which is her return to dystopian fiction. And one of the books I got to edit in my imprint. Um, Actually, getting her was like the big feather in my cap, the first big one in my cap. When because when she had so Chosen Ones was the first adult novel she wrote, and then Poster Girl was the second one. But when Chosen Ones was going around to editors, it's like, I read it immediately. I tried to bid on it immediately, and it was like a big auction situation. And so it was very stressful. It was like the first time at my imprint that I had one of these big auction situations to deal with. And like, the publisher was all in. And so it was like, I knew I had the support and everything, but like, I didn't know how it was going to go. And, when you have these kind of situations, like, you end up having a call with the agent and author on the phone, and like, you kind of have to try to sell them on going with you. And so I mean, like, we had the call and it went really well, but then it's going to be about the money largely, right? And so it's like I didn't know how much they were going to pony up compared to to other publishers, because HMH was they were like a major publisher, but they were smaller than like Random House.
Yeah.
They weren't one of the big five. They were like a large indie that could compete sometimes against those bigger publishers. And so it was like, yeah, I didn't know how it was going to go, but they ended up bidding very competitively, or allowing me to bid very competitively. And this was happening right when Infinity War came out. And like, I'm a big Marvel guy from way back in the day. I've been less interested in the movies over the last several years, but like, I was super into them for a while because like I grew up with Marvel comics. The Infinity Gauntlet was like my favorite comic miniseries of all time. So like, the fact that not only they were making all these Marvel movies, but like they were making the Infinity Gauntlet into a like major movie series. Like, that was bizarre to me. Like, I love Thanos. I love all that whole storyline. And so Infinity War was about to come out. It's like I was super excited. And so my wife and I had gone to like we were living in kind of a small town at the time, so we had to like drive to another town to go to a movie. And so we had driven to the town, for the movie. We were at a bookstore just killing some time before the movie, and I was starting to get calls from the agent, from Veronica's agent, and and it was all going down right then, and I was like, oh man, I can't go into a movie for 3 hours and not be able to answer my phone. And so we actually had to bail on going to the movie because I was like, I gotta stay and be involved with this. And as it happened, it was a worthy sacrifice because we got the book. But yeah, that was super exciting. And I love Veronica; she's great. And yeah, I wish that we had been able to do better for those books. Like, I mean, they're both great books. I don't know if it was just that I don't know, the publisher, they didn't know how to publicize them enough or whatever. But I mean, they never got the level of attention I thought they deserved. Um, but so I kind of feel like I let her down a little bit because it's like, well, she went with me, she trusted me to, be her adult editor. And then yeah, I don't know, but she's done okay for herself still. I mean, afterwards, she's selling other books, so I'm happy for her. And she still writes short stories for me when I ask. So,
She has one in this newest anthology, right? I think.
which one in Best American? Not this time.
Oh, maybe it's an old one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, she's had them in the past, and she guest edited one volume. She did have a story. So I've done a couple of Amazon original stories collections now. Which these, they're like 6 story anthologies that they just publish, and like if you're a Prime subscriber, you get them, you can read them for free. Otherwise, they cost like $2 per story. But they so I did one called The Far Reaches, which is like interstellar science fiction stories. I wanted to call it Interstellar, but somebody at Amazon was like, "Well, there's that movie called Interstellar," and I'm like, "They don't own the word Interstellar. Come on." So anyway, we called it The Far Reaches, and so anyway, Veronica wrote a story for that. That was really great. And that's the last thing I think I had published by her, but I'm working on a new book that she's going to write a story for too. I can't talk about it, but I'm very excited about that. Um, and yeah, but speaking of Amazon original stories, so like I have that one. I have actually it's coming out soon, I guess. I have one called The Time Traveler's Passport that's coming out soon. Can't remember. It's sometime this month. I don't remember the exact date, but it's coming out this month. It's got a bunch of great stories, and it got John Scalzi. It's got Olivia Blake. Who else is in that? Um, RF Kuang. It's a great
Yeah.
collection. I mean, Amazon pays a ton of money for these things, so it's like it's nice to be like sort of like Santa Claus going to all these authors and be like, "Hey, how about I back up the money truck so that you can write a story for this?" And yeah, so that's been great. And then I'm working on another one too that hasn't been announced yet. So that's been fun. Um, but yeah. Anyway, I'm off book of your question there.
Oh, that's okay. One of the last things that I was kind of curious about is in the literary field, I see that science fiction isn't very well regarded, it seems,
Uh-huh.
by publishers. So how
Yeah.
do you like, are there these stories out there? Is it easy to find them?
Hmm.
Or do you have to like really search?
You mean specifically for short stories for the book, or
Yeah, for science fiction in particular.
yeah? It's not hard at all, actually. I mean, there are so many, like, there's not a lot of like large publications that are
Yeah.
publishing science fiction short stories, but there's a ton of small ones. And with the internet making publishing so such a like easy proposition to start because the cost of entry is so low, like so many people who have the idea to do a magazine or something, they can very easily try it without having to invest too much. And so, I mean, there are so many places that a writer could sell a story right now. So, the thing is just that, like, how many people are going to find it and actually read it?
Yeah.
That's the challenge, right? And so, but there's like a bunch of like hardly regarded ones, like that places that you can sell a story. I mean, I don't know if the literary establishment would call them, highly regarded, but I mean, I don't care about that.
Yeah.
Like I'm setting the bar here for what's a good science fiction fantasy thing to read. So there's places like Clark's World and Lightspeed. There's Asimov's Analog, FNSF, Strange Horizons, Reactor, formerly Tor.com, Apex, Uncanny. There's all these places that are like regularly publish like great stuff. There's Faya. And there's all these magazines that that are out there that aren't as well known as those, but then they still publish good stuff.
Mhm.
So I don't think it's challenging at all to find good stories. It's just challenging to keep up with them all. Um, and then, of course, every year there's a couple anthologies get published, a couple of collections get published. A collection usually has at least one or two original stories in it, so you got to look at those. Um, and although science fiction fantasy has typically struggled to have to get like sort of respect from like the literary establishment, I mean that's gotten a lot better over the last sort of decade. So you have people like Karen Russell, who basically everything she writes is science fiction or fantasy. But I mean, she's a literary darling. I
Mhm.
mean, she gets published by mainstream publishers. She very rarely publishes anything that's in a that would be considered science fiction or fantasy coded. Like she'll have something in conjunctions, but that's like as sort of science fiction or fantasy as like her publications tend to be. It's like she'll be in the New Yorker or something. But even with a full-on fantasy story, no question, it's fantasy, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, they publish some stuff that's science fiction or fantasy. Sometimes it's really good. Um, but yeah, I mean that door has gotten broken down a bunch over the last decade, and so like it's a lot easier to get taken seriously now. I mean, I think there's still a lot of like really like fantastic stuff that's published in any given year that gets published as science fiction or fantasy that if it had been published as a mainstream book, it could have been probably much more successful or gotten more of a readership. And I think the literary sort of establishment or whatever, like critics or whatever, would have embraced it in a way that they probably wouldn't even look at it because it was published as science fiction or fantasy. Um, and so that's the only frustration I think that I have with that kind of with the kind of genre labels. Because I
Yeah.
mean, as a reader, I actually and well, as a fan, as an advocate of science fiction or fantasy, but then also as a reader of it, like I like being able to go into the section that says science fiction or fantasy, and I know that this section is where I'm likely to find something I like. Whereas like while while it's usually better for a book to be able to be in like the fiction section that isn't like genre labeled, it's like then you're like searching for a needle in a haystack. If what you want is science fiction or fantasy, yeah, there's a bunch of books in the fiction section that are science fiction or fantasy, but like how are you going to find them? I mean, you have to browse through everything. Like it's always been ridiculous to me. Like Margaret Atwood is in the fiction section because what she's writing is not science fiction, right? Of course, I have other issues with her. I mean, she's shat upon science fiction or fantasy like her whole career basically.
Yeah,
Only in the
even
last couple of
though
years. Yeah.
like her most famous books are
Yeah.
fantasy or science fiction.
Yeah. And I mean, she would always say like, science fiction is like talking squids in outer space or whatever, and it's like, and she's come around in the last couple of years, like she's walked some of that back, but like, you know, when I was first starting Best American Science Fiction or Fantasy, publisher had suggested, different guest editors and stuff. It was always my choice, but they would suggest them sometimes and be like, "Hey, how about Margaret Atwood?" And I'm like, even though she's come around in the last couple of years, it just feels like it would be like kind of spitting in the eye of science fiction fantasy readers who have been embracing the genre their whole lives to get this person who had denigrated it for so long, even though she was a practitioner of it. And I mean, that's like the worst kind of denigration is somebody who's doing the thing, but they're saying, oh, no, 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 no. Well, mine's good though. So
Oh.
the rest of this stuff is trash, which is why that's science fiction or fantasy. If it was good, it wouldn't be science fiction or fantasy. It would be literature, and
Ah.
so that's the kind of like I don't want that on in my book,
Yeah.
and so if I get to choose who's the guest editor, if I have the final say, you know what, I don't want to have somebody a guest editor who has talked trash about the genre for most of their career, you
Yeah.
know so
I love Nnedi Okorafor's work. Binti,
yeah.
so good. So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, she's amazing. Actually, she and I, like, if you read the forward, or people listening haven't, but she and I go way back. Like, we kind of started our careers around the same time. Like, she was one of the first people I had interviewed for the Sci-Fi Channel website, like I was talking about. And also, we both kind of had the same major surgery. So so she had scoliosis, I had kyphosis, which are both kind of similar related back issues, and we both had to have surgery for it. And the surgery is kind of the same. Like kyphosis, your spine is sort of deviated like front back, and scoliosis is left right, right? And so the surgery is kind of the same surgery. And so I had mine to do a spinal fusion to sort of straighten out my spine, and I have titanium rods in there. And mine went fine, but she had that surgery and she got paralyzed for a
Yeah.
while. And she luckily regained the use of her legs. But it was crazy. The whole story is crazy because I mean she was an athlete. She was like a top athlete, and that was probably going to be her career. And then she had this surgery and got paralyzed, and then that's what kind of made her a writer. And But yeah, so we kind of got started around the same time. We did this interview, and and I learned that we had this like connection of having the same surgery, and like the first original anthology I did was a small book called Seeds of Change, which also came out in 2008. It was like Between Wastelands and the Living Dead, but it was like a little tiny book. It was actually small in size too. It was only 40,000 words, so it was like less than half the size of a normal book. But like it was released by Prime Books, which later went on to be the original publisher of Lightspeed. Um, but it was just like an original science fiction anthology, and so I had really liked Nettie's stuff that I had seen like from early on, and so I invited her to write a story for that. So like she was like part of my literal first original project too. um and it was interesting too because like I think she had a couple books out at that point, and but so it's like everything she had written had been combining fantasy and science fiction in the same thing. And so, but like for Siege of Change, I had to challenge her to say like, well, can you write something that's just science fiction? Because that was important to like the concept of the
Mhm.
book. And so like I feel like that may have I think that sort of pushed her out of her comfort zone a little bit. And in doing so, I mean, she created one of the best things she's ever created, I think. I mean, this story called Spider the Artist, I still think about it all the time, and it's so great. I reprinted it in Lightspeed, so I mean, if anybody wants to read it, you can go read it online. It's so great. Um, and actually, so I live in Columbia, Missouri now, and she happened to just be doing like a tour, because she had her huge book come out this year called Death of the Author. It's like her first big like mainstream publication, and like got paid a ton of money for it. Like famously, like I know it was seven figures, like you could read about it. So it's like she got a huge advance for this thing, and it was like this big, media splash, and critics loved it and everything. I read it as well. I thought it was great. Um, but so she's been doing like touring all around the country all year, and so a lot of universities have had her come in because she's also a professor. She's got a PhD. Um, and so she ended up coming to speak at University of Missouri, which is here in Columbia. And I happened to only discover on the day of, but I did discover that she was coming to speak. And so I went to go hear her speak. And then, because I knew her, I ended up going to the dinner afterward with her. And so we got to hang out for a bit, which was cool because, I mean, we worked on this book, all the year before. And we hadn't got to hang out or anything. So, and I'd only met her once before. Like I probably in 2008 or 2009 or something like that, like just one time at a convention. So it's not like we ever like really got to spend any time together. It's just like we just knew each other from the internet. So but it was really cool to see her. um one I learned three things by hearing her talk at this event. One, she's a pantser, not a plotter, which if yeah, okay, you're laughing like you know what that means. If she was ever going to organize a library, it would be complete chaos. And she hates labels. So I kind of felt bad about putting her in the position to have to label stories as science fiction or fantasy. But I guess I kind of did that because like I gave her a bucket of science fiction, a bucket of fantasy, but then she had to pick 10 of each. So that's kind of like having to label something. So I kind of felt bad about that, but she didn't complain. So
Well, thank you so much. You've had such a great insight into like not even just people who want to go into editing, but people who want to submit work. Like I think they
yeah.
can take a lot from this. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. And I hope everybody does. If you're thinking about writing a story and you want to submit it, you absolutely should. And don't let rejection stop you from submitting other stories. And keep submitting that story until you feel like you've tried everywhere. Because sometimes it's just that you haven't found the right editor for it. Um, and Yeah, hope to see you in the slush pile, I guess.
Well, your assistant.
Yes.
Well, thank you again so much. I had such a wonderful time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I had a good time as well. Actually, if people want to keep up with what I'm doing, I have a newsletter now. It's called Robot Wizard Zombie Crit. It's like all of my favorite things. I also still love D&D, so um, you know, uh, you can find it on my website, and I send it out about once a week. And you know, I've been reading a bunch of novels this year, which I hadn't really been reading a lot of in recent years because I just been focused on short fiction. But I figured out a way to work it into my life, and so if you want to see what I've thought about recent books, and I cover a lot of TV and movies and stuff as well, and all that kind of stuff. And then I tell you when something new came out that I published.
And when you sign up, you also get a free ebook of
That's true.
robots, wizard,
Robot Wizard
zombie.
Zombie Crit. Yeah, yeah. I mean the free anthology you get is just called Robot Wizard Zombie Crit Stories Volume One. It doesn't have anything to do with the zombies or robots or anything. It's just the name of my newsletter, but so it's just a reprint anthology of stories that I think are great, and it's basically like a sampler of all of my work because it's like everything that's in that volume had previously been published by me in either in Lightspeed or in one of my anthologies or something. So it's like kind of like, hey, if you like the stuff that's in this, you'll probably like all this other stuff that I did. And at some point, I'll do a volume 2 and probably a volume 3 or something at some point down the road. But
Wonderful.
yeah.
I'm real excited to read it. I just signed up for your newsletter today.
Oh, okay.
So it's sitting open on my computer.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Thank you again. And for folks out there who've not yet picked up the best science fiction and fantasy of 2025, it's got a lot of really cool stuff in it, a lot of weird stuff in it. I
Mhm.
think it's really fun. I hope everybody, if you enjoyed this conversation, you go out and you subscribe, you go find John Joseph Adams. His website is just John Joseph Adams, and you can find all of his work there. So thank you, and I hope everybody has a great night. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Bye.